Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Okay.
Did everybody get some food? So, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think are we Facebook Living? Are we live streaming? We are on Facebook Live. So we're broadcasting around the world right now and possibly into outer space. So my name is Kristen Rouse. I am the founding director of the New York City Veterans Alliance. I'm also an organizer in residence here at Civic Hall. Thank you for coming to our first ever Lunch and Learn event here, which is a series that Civic Hall hosts and that we are proud to be part of, and to invite all of you and our government agency partners as well. To kick this off, I want to do a little bit of storytelling about what we're here to discuss today, which is Local Law 119, which is, as you see here, which was the bill called Intro 1259. And so the story of 1259 and 119 is really in many ways the story of the New York City Veterans Alliance. A little over 2 years ago, the New York City Veterans Alliance began as a member organization that is the only organization advocating for better policy for veterans and families here at the local level in New York City. And so we kicked it off in August of 2015. We started to invite members of the community in to tell us what they saw was wrong. And what we heard from folks in August, September, October through December of 2015 were a host of issues. But really it came down to, in many ways, that the city just wasn't recognizing veterans, wasn't recognizing, honoring, and protecting veterans. And so, we got a lot of input from all the folks that we brought into the rooms, a lot of the folks who signed on as members of the New York City Veterans Alliance, even before we really became a thing. People were willing to sign on and pay monthly and annual dues. And because they believed in us, we were able to say, okay, here's what's wrong, here's sort of what it adds up to. And then we decided to put it together as a bill that we proposed to Public Advocate Tish James. And we said, we think that a fundamental piece of legislation in New York City would be adding veterans and military members to New York City's robust civil rights law. And that veterans and military members should be as protected as any of the other important aspects of our daily life that we are protected for here in New York City, whether that be gender, sexual orientation, race, national origin, citizenship status, and so on. All the things that make New York City great are in that civil rights law, except for veterans and military status. And so we set about to change that. We appreciate Tish James's office being receptive to this. Oswaldo Pereira at that time received this with open arms and shepherded it through the process. And then Public Advocate Tish James co-sponsored the bill with Council Member Jumani Williams, and the two of them, August of last year, introduced the bill into the City Council. And since then, our members, again, these are members who, even before we really caught our stride as an organization, believed in us, joined us, and did the work with us to advocate for this bill to become a law. Folks in this room rallied with us. They called their city council members. They talked to the media. They talked to public officials. They let our city know that this bill was a priority, even when we were hearing a little bit from some city council members that, what could this possibly do for you? Our members answered that question and told the stories of how they've been discriminated against in housing and employment and other areas of their life. And so through the work of our membership, through the work of our community, the work of dedicated public officials, this law became a reality. It was passed unanimously this past June by New York City Council, and it's set to become law on November 18th, and that implementation of that law is what we're going to talk about today. And so, I couldn't be prouder, and I couldn't be more appreciative of, again, the members who supported us from early on, and also Civic Hall, which is the great space you're in here, which has given the New York City Veterans Alliance a space to grow and build and develop and have meetings like this. And also to our donors who have been generous and believed in us, and because of success like this law, or this bill becoming law, we've received a gift from Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist. He just donated $50,000 to us. And so that we can keep doing this kind of work, involving veterans and family members as civic leaders here in New York City. And so I want to thank representatives from Tish James's office. Stephanie is here, and it is also Stephanie's birthday. Happy birthday to Stephanie. And also I want to say thank you to Jumani Williams' office, who Councilmember Williams was also just crucial to the fight in letting the entire City Council know how important this bill is, and in finally getting it passed. And I want to say thank you to Michael from Jumani Williams' office for being here with us. And also, I really appreciate the partnership of the New York City Department of Veterans Services on this. They were for this from the very get-go, and they helped to shape this, what was a bill that we offered up as advocates. They led the work to really make this the most robust and strongest protection for veterans and military members in the country. And that work came from really smart people at DVS and also at our city's Commission on Human Rights. And so I want to say thank you to DVS and to CCHR, who you'll hear from today. So without further ado, and thank you all for listening to the story of how Intro 1259 became local law, or is about to become local law 119. I also invite you to join as members of the New York City Veterans Alliance. Anybody can be a member. You can join on our website, or talk to myself or Olivia or Corey about it. And because we're looking to involve our members, grow, and do even more for veterans and families here in New York City, and to have them at the forefront of this kind of advocacy. And so without further ado, let me introduce Dana Sussman, Deputy Commissioner of the city's Commission on Human Rights. Did I say that right?
Yes.
I got it right. Yes. Thanks, Dana. Thanks for it.
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you to the New York City Veterans Alliance for, sorry, I'm a little short, so, for having us. It's pretty, every time I hear the story of how quickly this all came together between the start of this organization and passing legislation unanimously, it's incredible. I don't think I've heard anything quite like it. So we're super excited at the New York City Commission on Human Rights to be partnering with DVS and the New York City Veterans Alliance to implement this law. And I'm here to give a little bit of an overview of what the Commission does, what the human rights law is, and how people can access their rights and come to the Commission as a venue for justice when they're facing discrimination. So the Commission is the city's agency that educates folks, does community outreach, and enforces the New York City anti-discrimination law, the New York City human rights law. In the past 2.5 years since our commissioner took leadership over the agency, we've nearly tripled in size. Our law keeps expanding to add new protections like the veterans and service members protection, and we are taking in more cases than ever and doing larger cases and larger investigations. Our language capacity has also grown from 6 languages 2.5 years ago to 34 languages now. We really strive to represent the city that we serve in every way. A few just sort of logistical things about us. We are located in all 5 boroughs. We have one office in each borough. Our main office is in Lower Manhattan by City Hall, and that is where our legal team is, our law enforcement bureau, which I'll describe in a bit. You can always access us by calling 311. You can also call us directly, and that number is elsewhere here and on our materials, and that's 718-722-3131. But also, if you know anyone at the Commission, you can email us directly. There's lots of different entry points. We keep it that way on purpose so that people can find us however they're most comfortable. We also have a form on our website you can complete to report discrimination, and then you'll get a call and an email back. So I'll get a little bit into how to file a complaint at the second half, but just to frame sort of what is the New York City Human Rights Law. We are really proud of it as one of the most broad anti-discrimination laws in the country, but as Kristen mentioned, it was missing a key protection that other jurisdictions had that we did not have, and that was veterans, both active and former military service members. So our area of the law covers 5 main areas. The first 3 are the key ones here today, and they are the most common. That's employment, public accommodations, and housing, and I'm going to get into a little bit about coverage under each of those categories. For you to file at the Commission, to file a complaint, the discriminatory act has to have occurred within the past year, so the past 365 days. You can also, this amendment also empowers people to go to state court. So you don't have to come to the Commission. We encourage you to, but you can also go to state court and file a claim there. You have 3 years to do so. So you have more time if you go to state court than if you come to the Commission on Human Rights. So the most important thing to establish discrimination beyond the act that we're describing is to establish the relationship. So you've got to have that covered relationship. The employee and the employer, that also includes applicants. So any job applicant would be covered. A tenant or an applicant for housing, and the landlord or the housing provider, and the customer and the public accommodation. So public accommodations are generally places that are open to the public, like businesses, movie theaters, cafes, restaurants, libraries, parks, things like that. The other 2 provisions of our law are discriminatory harassment and bias-based profiling by law enforcement, which are a little bit different and narrower, and I actually won't be it says I'll be covering them, but I won't be because we'll be focusing on employment, housing, and public accommodations today. So the new uniform service protections. There's a lot of text on this screen, but we also have one-pagers that I'd love for folks to take with them and take home and give to their colleagues and their organizations. It is very broadly defined under our employment, housing, and public accommodations provisions. So it includes current or former service in the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Commission Corps of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Commission Corps of the United States Public Health Service, Army National Guard or Air National Guard, the state militia for New York State or any other state, anything that's designated under the federal code as uniformed services. So if things are added to that, it would be automatically added to our law. Membership in any reserve component of all of the above. And being listed on the state reserve list or the state retired list. So I know this definition was developed in consultation with the experts in the room to ensure that it was as broad as possible. So what it does not prohibit providing preferences or privileges based on uniformed service. So if a business wanted to offer a discount or special event geared towards uniformed service members, that would not be prohibited. It does not specifically address discharge status or potential conduct that had led to discharge status. I know we are exploring ways to expand protections that might include this, but currently the law itself does not address it. However, protections that may sort of correspond with different issues relating to discharge status exist in our law, and we will think creatively around how we might incorporate those protections if there is, an issue regarding actual or perceived sexual orientation or disability. Those are areas that are protected, and if we think that someone is being targeted based on a combination of some of those factors, we will include that in the complaint as well. I should mention, if folks have questions, feel free to interrupt me, raise a hand, or we can do it at the end, whatever folks feel more comfortable with.
Can you
Yes.
go back to the prior slide?
Yes.
I missed something there about reservists. Also, it includes
Yes,
I
yes,
just wanted,
yes.
I wanted to put my.
Okay, yes, it does include reservists, absolutely. Okay. So, this kind of is now, so uniformed service is now added to our broader protections around employment. Employment covers all employees, interns, whether they're paid or unpaid, and job applicants. There's a whole host of categories that you're protected under. The two in the red are the ones that are coming into effect very soon. It will soon be illegal to ask about one's salary history when you're, for an employer to ask about your salary history when you are negotiating your salary. And then in November, you will, uniformed service will be added to this long list. And like I said, we have protections in a whole host of areas that may or may not be relevant here to folks: gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, national origin. And so we're very proud that uniformed service is now being added to that list. So our protections in employment are quite broad. If you work in New York City, you're generally protected. If you are applying for a job in New York City, you're generally protected. You don't have to live in New York City. You simply have to work or be applying for a job in New York City. For most protections, including the uniformed service protection, the employer has to have 4 or more employees. So really, really small employers generally are not required to comply with the New York City human rights law. The employees can work in different locations. The employers themselves count, so the boss would count towards this calculation. And the employees don't actually all have to work in New York City in order for us to get to the 4. We are very creative about getting to that 4. And we interpret the protections broadly, so we figure out a way to get to that 4. Like I said, it covers interns, whether paid or unpaid. It doesn't matter if someone's documented or undocumented or part-time. Also covers many independent contractors, which is unique under our law. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. Okay, so protections for employees or applicants. Job ads. You can't publish a job ad that says anything about restricting someone's access to a job based on one of our protected categories. You can't ask questions about membership in a protected group in the interview. That's a big no-no. It might be innocuous, but if we can make a connection to the fact that you're not getting a job because you're being asked inappropriate questions, that would potentially be a claim. You can't be fired for being a member in a protected group. We see that a lot when someone, is hired. People don't know that they have a disability, or they don't know that they're pregnant, and then they disclose it, and then suddenly the terms of their employment have changed. You can't be treated differently based on your protected status, and you can't, based on pay or any of the other areas here, like promotions, assignments, scheduling, or the availability of an accommodation where appropriate. And accommodations are available for folks with disabilities, pregnancy, to observe religious practices, things like that. So that's employment, and I just want to reiterate that we again interpret the law broadly. So if you suspect that something's going on, you should come to us. We can kind of flesh it out and make a determination.
Right. With like civil jobs, you have like points for being a veteran. How does that? If you can't ask, how do you get the points?
So when there is a local, state, or federal protection or privilege that's available, you can ask. And we say that too. That comes up actually when you're hiring someone with a criminal history. There are certain like tax benefits or things for hiring veterans, hiring certain populations, and you can ask. What we recommend generally is that people explain why they're asking. Okay. Which, again,
I hire, but I just
no, exactly. And we want people to be able to have the benefits to do that and to access those jobs. So just really briefly, like I mentioned, we're covering three main areas here: protections and public accommodations. So again, thinking broadly, providers of public accommodations are anyone who provides services, spaces, or goods to the public. Schools, stores, taxis, restaurants. There are narrow exemptions for certain private educational institutions and private clubs. But don't worry about those. Most things that are open to the general public are public accommodations. And here are our protected categories. For public accommodations, again, we'll be adding uniform service. So customer service, this is really what we see. We see refusal of service or mistreatment or not allowing someone who's trans to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity, targeting certain customers for surveillance because they think they're more likely to shoplift, not providing an accommodation to someone who needs it. So again, uniform services will be added here. So if someone is being mistreated in a public space because of their membership as a uniform service member, they would have a claim under our law in almost all public spaces. Moving on to protections in housing. So keeping with our theme, again, broad protections in housing. I know this is incredibly important to many New Yorkers, including many uniform service members. So this runs across sort of the entire real estate transaction. Anyone who's selling, renting, or leasing, which not only includes landlords, but includes building managers, brokers, realtors, cannot discriminate because of someone's actual or perceived protected status. There's a few exceptions here, but again, they're pretty narrow. It kind of involves a family situation where a family may own like a 2-story brownstone and they live on one floor and they're renting out the second floor and they're not publicly advertising for that second floor. They can kind of pick and choose who they want to live there. And there's a few, or a roommate situation, if you're living there and you're on the lease and you want to rent your room, you can be picky about who you want to rent your room to. Other than that, for the most part, all housing providers, which includes, like I said, the brokers and the realtors and the landlords, must comply with our law. So here are the protected classes in housing. Again, pretty long list. I'm going to talk a little bit too about lawful source of income, which overlaps with the GI Bill housing allowance. But again, we'll be adding uniform service here. So lawful source of income is something we see really prevalently in New York City, and that is essentially where landlords will not accept housing vouchers. That is actually illegal in New York City since 2008. When I said earlier that the housing accommodation is defined very broadly, this is one exception. The unit, there has to be 6 units or more in the building or that the owner has access to for this protection to count. So they're trying to avoid getting at really, really small landlords with this one. But that being said, if there's 6 units or more, a landlord cannot turn away someone because they're using rental subsidies. We are spending a ton of work, doing a ton of work in this area. We know it's super prevalent. Yeah.
When you say that the owner has access, do you mean if an owner owns apartments in different buildings?
Yes, exactly. So if we look across the city and we find 6 units, then they would fall under our law. It's really trying to get at kind of like the mom and pop situation where it seems that, you know, involving themselves in the rental subsidy thing might be complicated. But we have some materials that we published with the Department of Veterans Affairs that provides like a letter to landlords to explain what the GI Bill housing allowance does, because I know there's some confusion and hesitancy around not being able to account for the full 12 months of the year when you're in school for 9 months. So we have some publications on that, and we know it overlaps with the Uniform Services Protection. So this one's a really important one for folks to know. So it manifests in different ways. It could be just straight up refusing to rent an apartment. It could be refusing to process renewal paperwork, refusing to do repairs the same way that they might for other tenants. Holding them to higher standards, like showing that they earn 40 times the rent, which is kind of impossible, or requiring credit checks when they're not requiring the same kind of things for other types of tenants. Another area of our law that we don't talk about as much, but I do know comes up for uniform service members as well, is unlawful lending and credit practices. So this is holding different folks to essentially different standards when it comes to mortgage loans or credit applications and things like that. And uniform services is added to this area as well. So for all of the categories I just described, if you file a complaint at the commission or you just raise concerns around discrimination and then you are retaliated against, you are fired, you are kicked out, you don't get the apartment, that's a separate claim under our law. We can't allow for people to be freely retaliated, to retaliate against people for raising their rights. So that could add another claim. It's another violation of our law, and we need to encourage people to come forward. So what do you get if you come to the commission? So like I said, there's two options when you have a claim under the New York City Human Rights Law. You can file at the commission, which is a 1-year statute of limitations, or you can file a civil action in state court, which is a 3-year statute of limitations, so you have a little bit more time. But there's slightly different things that you can get. At the commission, you can get compensatory damages, which means sort of the harm that was caused to you. Lost wages, emotional distress damages. We have, the sort of American system of justice in the civil context is money, right? So you get compensated for the harm. We can also issue adjunctive relief, which means that we stop the respondent from engaging in the behavior that's unlawful, or we require that they do something else. It could be that we require that they go to training, that they post a notice of rights in their workplace or in the housing lobby or a space that people can see. We can issue civil penalties, which are essentially punishment for the wrongful act. In most circumstances, it's a max of $125,000. It could go up to $250,000 in the most egregious cases. The penalties are paid to the city of New York. The compensatory damages are paid to the harmed party. Other affirmative action, like I said, we're working through different creative ways of getting at real sort of behavior and systemic change. Could be community service, could be, agreeing to hire X number of, for example, veterans over the next 2 years, or people with criminal histories or something like that. So we're working on different sort of restorative justice methods. And if attorneys file a complaint on behalf of a client, they can also get attorney's fees, which is new. So for the attorneys in the room, attorney's fees are actually available at the commission now, which is a new thing. Like I said, attorney's fees are now available for people that are interested. We accept attorney-filed complaints. So the system was set up at the commission to be a friendly venue for people who don't have attorneys. However, if you do have an attorney, or if you are an attorney and you want to file cases with us, we welcome that. It helps the process. It's always, we have attorneys on staff, many dozens of attorneys on staff, but they are not the complainant's attorney. They are representing the interests of the city as a neutral investigator until we make a determination as to whether discrimination occurred, and I'll get to the process in a second. So having an attorney could be very useful to someone who's coming forward, because they can just help navigate the process. What's also good about coming to the commission is because we're getting complaints from all members of the city, and we have, a central place where we're storing this information, we can see if X company this is a systemic issue at this one place, and we can connect the dots and make it into a bigger case. We also can look at broader issues. So if someone comes to us and says they've been turned away because of their uniform service status, we can also say, actually, we want to look at, what are you doing around criminal history? What are you doing around gender identity? We can actually ask for more information and see if there's a broader issue there than what we're just initially seeing. We are engaging in ongoing monitoring, like I said, requiring people to complete community service, or to hire a certain number of people, or to recruit in certain areas where they might not have been before, undergo training that we provide, and post a notice of rights in their workplace or in their accommodation. So this might not be super clear to folks the way it's designed, but the idea is here's sort of our step-by-step process. You would come in for an intake, meet with an attorney. If you are not represented, meet with an attorney. If we determine that we think that there potentially is a violation of the law, we will file a complaint. The complaint is served on the other party. They have an opportunity to respond. We investigate at bubble number 3. That is where the bulk of the work happens in order for us to determine if we have probable cause or no probable cause that discrimination occurred. Any point in this process, the case may settle. If we are moving it down the road and we are confident that there's likely going to be a probable cause finding, we will often reach out to the respondent and to the complainant and say, hey, we think that this is an opportunity to talk settlement. What is important to you? What can we do to resolve the case? That could mean, damages. That could mean training, that can mean a whole host of things. But most cases that we're heading down the probable cause road, we will engage in a conversation around settlement. If we get to probable cause, then it goes to litigation. At this point, after number 4, we are no longer neutral. We are litigating on the behalf of that individual. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I'd like to know if this wonderful process has any impact, that's the right word, with jurisdiction is the better word. For an example, many veterans have to wait 6 months at a VA hospital or facility. And some of them are not in good shape. It's not like me saying, hi doc, I want my yearly mammogram. Oh, okay, you have to wait a month. Okay, that's the norm.
Yeah.
But for veterans who really need help, they're put off for 6 months. Does this process help in that regard, being that it's federal?
So that's a great question. So the question is whether we would have jurisdiction over VA hospitals and the delay. And unfortunately, we do not have coverage over state and federal entities. We don't have jurisdiction.
How about internal New York City agencies?
We do have jurisdiction over New York City agencies. So there's that silver lining. We do have cases against our sister agencies. We will work with them on a policy level if we think there's something systemic going on, but we take those cases and we litigate them just like any other case. So like I said, we get to probable cause. At that point, through 1, 2, 3, up to 4, we are neutral investigators. Once we get to probable cause, we are no longer neutral. We are essentially the complainant, and the city's interests are aligned in eradicating discrimination. So at that point, we are the attorneys, sort of advocate, the prosecutors, the civil prosecutors, litigating the case. The case does go to a trial. It's an administrative trial. It's not like there's not a lot of media. It's not a big thing, but it is a trial before an administrative judge. And they issue a recommendation, and then the final decision and order actually comes from our commissioner. If we find no probable cause, then there's an appeal process. You can actually appeal that to our commissioner, and you can appeal anything that comes out of our office to state court as well. So there's several levels to this. But most cases, like in most litigation postures, cases will resolve before they go to trial. So if you are unrepresented, you can call 311 and ask for the commission. You can, we work with 311 very closely to make sure that on November 18, they know that when someone calls and says they're being discriminated against based on their military status, that it goes to the commission. But just in case, call and ask for the Commission on Human Rights. Or that's, again, our info line number, which just skips the 311 step, and that's 718-722-3131. People are available 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Could a veteran call and come in about the difficulty he's having with a sister agency, namely HRA, involving a restaurant allowance difficulty?
Yes.
But this is going to come down to a legal matter. I'm the veteran.
Yes. So we absolutely take cases against our sister agencies, including HRA. It just depends as to whether it's a violation of our law or some other, there may be something else going on. But if there is a potential violation of the human rights law, you can bring it to us against HRA. So like I said, you can call our info line. We're available during business hours. We have a staff that mans and womans the phones. But if you go to voicemail, we will give you a call back between 24 and 48 hours. And we have multiple languages capacity on the line. And if we don't have someone available, we will call in a phone interpreter. They will do a very initial screen, a 5 to 10 minute conversation, just to make sure A, it happened in New York City, B, it happened in the past year, kind of just go through some of those initial facts, and they will set up an appointment for you to come in and meet with an attorney. Sometimes the appointments are several weeks out simply because we are getting a lot of calls. If, however, we're bumping up, this won't happen for a year, but if we are bumping up next November to a 1-year statute of limitations issue and we're running out of time, we will push that person to the front of the line. So we have certain ways to move people forward, but it does take a few weeks to come in. Then you'll meet with an attorney who will draft a complaint on your behalf, and we will serve it on the other party, who then has 30 days to respond, and then that's really where the process begins. For attorneys who want to file complaints, there is a format on our website under our rules of practice, but if it doesn't fit our format and it's really it's not that big a deal, but if it is, we will call and say, hey, can you refile and do X, Y, or Z? You can email it to LEB, which is our Law Enforcement Bureau, at the City Commission on Human Rights' email address, cchr.nyc.gov, and with an original mailed to our Law Enforcement Bureau. All of this is on our website as well. The intake form will be emailed to the attorney to fill out, which just includes some additional information. At the intake interview, we are going to be, people ask what you're looking for at that initial interview if you're unrepresented. We're really looking for disparate treatment, which means just treated less well. Generally speaking, treated less well. It could be in the job hiring process, it could be in when you're already in the workplace, or the housing application process, but we want to see any indicia of being treated less well. People do not need to come in with a case wrapped up with a bow. It's our job to investigate. So if we think there is any reason to believe that there's the possibility of discrimination, we will initiate an investigation. And again, it's our job to do the work. So we will look at comparators. We will ask the entity to open up their books and see how they're treating other similarly situated people. We will ask about comments. We will potentially interview witnesses, review documents. So, you don't have to come in with a fully formed case. A lot of people ask. That's sort of our job to put together. If you are drafting a complaint and you're an attorney or you're an advocate working with someone, you have to name the parties. We need enough information to serve the party. So we need an address, we need something. We can do some research too, but we need enough to identify the party. We want to be able to have information in the complaint that addresses the jurisdictional issues, so that it happened in New York City, at least 6 units for source of income, if it's a source of income case, at least 4 employees, pleading sufficient facts, just the basic facts. We're not talking about something super detailed, but it's essentially notice pleading. It's pretty generous, so you want to just plead the relevant facts. Include the charging language, so including the claims that you're making under the City Human Rights Law. Don't forget which ones you're making under the City Human Rights Law. And then in employment cases, we dual file with the EEOC in some cases. Not in uniformed services, because that would be a different federal agency, but in other cases like race, religion, gender, we would send it also to the EEOC. So if you are an attorney who is interested in taking these cases, in the investigation process, this is sort of where the helpful, where it would be really helpful for attorneys to get involved. Facilitating communication with the complainant. Otherwise, we're interacting directly with the complainant, which is totally fine, and we do it all the time. But if we had an attorney or an advocate that was gathering the information, facilitating communication, that would be great. Once the responding party answers, the complaining party can then submit a rebuttal, so you can help prepare that. It's not required, but it's often helpful. And then help us identify witnesses and other evidence, so that we can go in with sort of educated information and go to the respondent with targeted questions. So during what we call conciliation, which is basically settlement, this would be what you would help with in that context, and it's basically 3 parties. It's the commission, which represents the city, it's the complaining party, and the responding party. You would identify what your client needs and wants. We would engage in an informal negotiation, sort of the 3 parties involved, and there's the potential for a settlement conference at the city administrative trial process, the city's Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. So there is a meeting before a judge where the 3 parties would come together and engage in settlement conversations before trial. And then finally, representation at the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. So it's when we go to trial, it's the city versus the bad actor, but the complaining party can intervene in the case as well. So there could be 3 parties at trial and help with discovery, be present at depositions, be at the trial, engage in direct and cross-examination, and then submit, once the administrative law judge issues the report and recommendation, there's an opportunity to send comments to our commissioner, the chair, and commissioner of the City Human Rights Commission, and you can draft those as well. But again, most cases don't go all the way down this path, but there's at key points along the process, it's helpful to have representation, although again, not essential. So the commission also has the power to initiate our own investigations. If someone submits a tip on the website or calls anonymously, you don't have to leave your name, and there's a lot of reasons why people do not want to put their names on complaints these days. Particular vulnerabilities, being undocumented, just not really wanting to engage in another process. You can give us information. Hey, I saw this ad. It seemed problematic, or I was turned away and I'm not sure what was going on, but I think there's an issue here. We gather that information, and when appropriate, we will initiate our own investigation using the city's resources. So we have testers, we can request information, we can send cease and desist letters. So we really encourage folks to, it could be as informally as someone from the New York City Veterans Alliance emailing me and saying, hey, we're concerned about this, and then we'll send it to our law enforcement bureau. But you could also call or send a tip through our website. We have a form on our website. So this is what we can do. We can send out testers, we can issue requests for information, we can subpoena documents and witnesses, we can send a cease and desist letter, and then we can file our own complaint where the commission is the party, is the complaining party, not an individual. So I know I gave you a lot of information. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Does that information eventually become public?
So when we file a case, it's not like, there's no sort of court register where it's published on, but when we file a commission-initiated case, those are generally public. We speak, because there's no individual party involved, individual human being, we generally talk about those. When it's a complainant that's filing, we're investigating, we do not speak publicly about those because they're in the investigation phase.
And what about the complaint being anonymous or known to you but wanting to remain anonymous along the way? How does that work?
We would not use their name or identifying information in any documents that we file down the road.
Even in front of the administrator.
So there is the possibility that if we did go to trial, folks would potentially be called as witnesses. What we can do though is seek protective orders and sort of closed courtroom situations where we wouldn't necessarily have, an open, people could come in and sort of observe or record. So there are ways that we can protect people's identities. But the truth of the matter is, the commission has only really engaged in this aggressive commission-initiated filings in the past 2.5 years. We haven't had a single one go all the way down that road where we have such highly sensitive information. But our staff are really, really committed, especially with folks who are undocumented and others who it's highly sensitive, and we know right now that it is. We will do everything in our power to ensure that their identities are kept.
Well, there can be any kind of retaliation from someone who's a citizen.
Absolutely, yes.
So
absolutely.
Any reason.
And again, the reality is too, even if your name is kept off a complaint, if you're currently working there, if you're currently living there, it's people can put two and two together, and we have to be honest with folks when they consider working with us that they may suspect that it's you. Obviously, we have the power to to go after them again for retaliation, but these are people's lives, and we want to be honest about the reality of filing. It can be or even just talking to us. It can be particularly challenging. So, like I said, I've given you a lot of information just now, but there's some helpful resources on our website. I really strongly encourage folks to look around on the website. We also have some materials printed out here. It's nyc.gov/human rights. There's lots of outreach materials. We will be publishing those our one-pager on veterans and service members very soon, probably this week, but you guys have a preview today. We also have that resource on source of income discrimination, particularly how it relates to the GI Bill housing allowance, and other materials on our website as well. So please do check us out and also follow us on social media.
Is there you mentioned that we can go to the state as well as not go through your agency with certain things, especially against another agency. Can we do both at the same time, or has to only be one?
Right. So there's a couple different things. One is state court. You can go to state court, which is, again, there's a 3-year statute of limitations. If you go to state court, you can't file at the commission. You kind of have to choose one or the other. The State Division of Human Rights, which is our state agency counterpart, has veterans protections in their law that has been around longer than ours. So you could also choose to go to the state for very similar claims. But again, if you get to a certain point in the process, you can't also file with us. It's sort of a one or the other option.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm Alexander Paz, Vietnam veteran, Marine Corps. One, I want to thank your office for participation in reference to ADA housing.
Yes.
Under, I think one of your agents, I don't know if he's still there, Ted Finkelstein.
Yes, yes.
Lived in a building by which there was an ADA situation complaint where the front door was too heavy for people who had wheelchairs and or walkers. So we had, through your office, had a automatic door put in. But we also worked with your office, and I want to thank you for that too, in reference to the internal apartment situations when it comes to ADA people who have wheelchairs and need to get to cabinets and things like that. My question is, are you having problems with in getting people in the 80-20 buildings, that 20%ers that either have issues such as, in your case, this conversation, veterans or people with disabilities? Thank you.
Sure. So we have some 80-20 cases, I believe. But the way that the agencies administer those procedures, there's some limitation to how we can engage with, or claims that might implicate the way that they administer their own procedures is a little bit challenging for us, because we sort of need to, there's some potential limitations in our law as to challenging sort of other agency decisions, if that makes sense. But if you have a specific
there are other
situation,
agencies involved.
Right.
Federal would be HUD,
Right.
obviously,
NYCHA,
city,
potentially,
HPD.
yeah.
But when it comes to an ADA or a veteran, which might be special category.
Right.
Not too long ago they were trying to impose a poor entrance.
Right. We did actually have some of those cases, the poor door cases. Yes. So what's interesting is we can sort of be creative with our source of income protections, which are the protections around using rental subsidies. But some of those cases are more about rent control and rent stabilized units, and there's a little bit of an open question as to whether rent stabilized and rent controlled folks would fall into the source of income protections under our law.
Well, the 80-20s are all brand new, brand new animals, so they don't fall into rent control.
Right.
And they don't fall into rent stabilization. They're basically affordable market or market rent.
Right.
With a subsidy type program.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the sort of, I think again, like we've been trying to think creatively about being as broad and protective as possible, and there may be some limitations there, because if you look at the source of income protections under our law, they were created with certain programs in mind, and new programs are popping up, and we have to sort of be creative about our arguments to bring more people into that protection. But the other thing that I should mention is that the poor door case, one of the poor door cases that we actually had, we looked at the breakdown of the building. The rent-controlled tenants were mostly older. The new market rate tenants were mostly younger. So we were actually able to use it as sort of a disparate impact case and say, actually, this is harming, while it may be a quote-unquote neutral policy under our law, it's actually disproportionately harming older residents. And so we were actually able to use that legal approach as opposed to whether rent controlled actually fell within our law. So we try to look at it from different angles. If it disproportionately impacts people with disabilities or veterans, we will be able to use that legal theory to get at the issue. And we also work with our sister agencies, and we think that there's a systemic issue. Even if no one's come forward, we learn about it somehow. It may be in the news, or someone raises it with us. We will approach our sister agency, sort of policy to policy person, and say, what's going on here? Can we figure out a better way to do this? And it doesn't always work, but it's worth a shot. So.
Thank you.
So we'll have a little bit more time for questions and discussion at the very end, but thank you, Dana, so much. Like this is wonderful. Give Dana a hand. It's a lot of information. And thank you so much. And so a couple quick things before I introduce our next speaker. One, could everybody who's an attorney who works in the veteran space raise their hands? So we have attorneys in the room who could assist you with the filing of this. and otherwise, discuss issues with you that you might be concerned about. Also, the person in the back who had a question earlier about recourse for VA delays. I want to make sure that everybody in the room knows that we have the honor of having with us today Michael Burton from Senator Gillibrand's office. As a constituent services rep for Senator Gillibrand, he could discuss constituent complaints about VA access with you. And so that's a way. Either contact Senator Gillibrand's office, Senator Schumer's office, or your congressional office. Just recently, Congressman Dan Donovan, who's a representative from Staten Island and South Brooklyn, he took on complaints that were bubbling up about the Brooklyn VA, and really led on making sure that a proposed plan to close the surgery wing at the Brooklyn VA, that got shut down. And so, that came from the advocacy community. We were part of voicing that concern, and, to have elected officials do their job for our constituents, make sure that you're exercising that muscle. And so next up, I would like to introduce Alexis Wichowski, Press Secretary for the New York City Department of Veterans Services. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for having me. Thank you to the New York City Veterans Alliance for organizing this event, and thank you for our city government partners, the Commission on Human Rights, the Public Advocate's Office. We're really pleased to be part of this community. So I'll keep this brief. This is just a little overview of our agency. You've already heard a lot about the law. I'll touch on it a little bit, but I just wanted to let people know that A, we exist, and a little bit about what we do and who we are. We're a new agency. We're about a year old. There was a mayor's office for Veterans Affairs before the agency was created, but we really are quite new. So what we are is an agency committed to helping individual veterans and their families here in New York City. And we want to do this in three ways. One is through community engagement, making sure that we are helping people transition into their civilian lives in a variety of different capacities. We want to make sure that we are working one-on-one with veterans and their family members for advocacy purposes. If they're finding that they can't get the help they need at the VA, we're friends with the VA, we're good partners with the VA, but we recognize they can't handle everything. So we work one-on-one with veterans to help deal with their cases. Oh, sorry, thank you. Okay. And then the last one is we want to make sure that we're compassionate in the service that we provide. We understand that a lot of people who are accessing government services get frustrated by the bureaucracy. And if the least that we can do is sit with you one-on-one, go through your case, hear your concerns and complaints, and provide a compassionate ear for you, that's a start. So we're not going to end there. We're going to keep working with you to help resolve your issues. We have a lot of material here over on this table on the side that talks about our various work that we do, but we have about a third of our staff are outreach officers who are in the field working with veterans one-on-one. One of the other things we wanted to do is figure out who our population is. We have a lot of information from the VA about what New York State looks like in terms of veterans, but we now have our Chief Information Officer who's been doing a sort of deep dive into the New York City veteran population. So we're able to find not only how many veterans and family members we have, and this graphic includes reservists and people in the National Guard, but also what proportion live in what borough, by what era of service, etc. We're about to produce a report. This will be our first ever report on the sort of state of the New York City veteran. So all of this information will be included in that, and that'll be out within the next month or so. So more to come on that. And this is just some more information about the veteran population in New York City. And I'll make sure that these slides are available to anybody who's interested in them. So we have three what we call lines of action in our agency. First is housing and support services. This is our most robust and developed line of action, and this is because we really wanted to address the veteran homelessness problem. 5 years ago, there were about 5,000 homeless veterans in New York City, and now there are closer to 500. So we've made a lot of progress in making sure that homeless veterans And this is something that we've only accomplished established with partnership with lots of other city agencies, working at the state level, working at the federal level. There's a lot of partnerships that have gone into making this happen, but we've done a tremendous amount in this area. The second line of action we call whole health and community resilience. We recognize that health is not just about what happens when you go to a clinic. It's not just medical care. It's about overall wellness and well-being. So we have a lot of different areas that we focus on there. The last line of action is sort of the big bucket of everything else. As you can see, it's quite an unwieldy title, but it's employment, it's education, it's entrepreneurship, it's ceremonial events, it's engagement with our community. And I'll talk about each of these briefly. So this is that number I was just talking about with the New York City veterans homelessness situation and the reduction over the last 5 years. Now, the current state of the veteran population is we have about 500 or so who are mostly in shelter, and we have established a system where they are rapidly housed within 90 days. And one of the ways that we do this is we have what we call peer coordinators working one-on-one with the veteran from getting their paperwork in order, making sure they have the right clothes to wear when they meet the landlord, driving them to see the apartments, walking with them through the whole process until they have the key in their hand. So by doing this with just 4 people working on that team, we've housed about 250 veterans in a year. So it's a tremendous amount of work that they've accomplished, and we're really proud of that. Our second line of action is we're working closely with the First Lady of New York's Thrive NYC team, a roadmap for mental health. And it involves various aspects, including changing the culture around mental health, acting early, etc. But what this really means is that we understand that, as I said earlier, mental health is not just about, it's not just a medical condition, it's about wholeness and wellness in life. So our commissioner, who is if anybody hasn't had the chance to hear her speak, I encourage you to. She's a really vibrant and incredible person. She's a psychiatrist who spent 30 years in the Army, and she developed this model, which we call the core form model. And you'll notice that the clinical care is at the top of the pyramid there. It's not where we start. Our goal is to start with culture and peer-to-peer connection as a low stigma, low cost way to engage with veterans and get them involved in their communities. So this is something that we're going to be rolling out more robustly in the next year or so, but I just wanted to briefly introduce this component of the Thrive NYC model. If you need help and you don't have the capacity to or interest in coming to Manhattan, we have offices in every one of the 5 boroughs now, and actually 2 offices in Staten Island, recognizing that it's harder to get around there. So on the table over here, there's a card with the office information for all of our offices. We have Donnell Simon is here. So, there he is, Donnell Simon. He's a member of our team. Oh, and I'm sorry, and Martine Nivos is also here as well. These are 2 of our offices. And they're out there every day in the community, at job fairs, in the borough president's offices, meeting with veterans one-on-one to help them with their specific issues. One of the things we hear a lot about when we go to events like this is, okay, all this policy stuff is great, but what about my issue? I'm having problems with my benefits or my claims. We have people who are able to help with those. We are in the process of procuring a coordinated service network called VetConnect NYC, so that this is what we call our no wrong door approach to accessing service. We currently have about 80 vetted service providers who are part of the network, and we're in the process of procurement. The procurement has been a long process, but we'll be rolling this out pretty soon. And one of the things that one of the reasons that we are acquiring this network is because we recognize that there's a ton of services out there, but it can be hard to navigate and to know what services are the best and most appropriate for your needs. So that's what this platform will do, and we'll be rolling this out fairly soon. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about the law that we just heard about from the Commission on Human Rights. It is now the strongest veterans protection law in the country, and it differs from federal law. I made a slight error on the slide here in referencing discharge status. It does differ from federal law in the sense that it protects all veterans and service members regardless of time in service, and it also covers people in the reserves and in the National Guard. The discharge status component, I was informed by our general counsel on my way here that is as our colleague in the Commission on Human Rights mentioned, not yet included in the law, but we are working on making sure that we address that, because at the New York City Department of Veterans Services, we work with veterans regardless of discharge status, regardless of length of service. If you've raised your hand and joined an armed service, we will help you. Yes.
That includes reservists who have not been mobilized
Yes.
or on the 1 days.
Absolutely. We will work with every veteran and their family member regardless of time in service or discharge status. And as you've just heard, that one of the great things about this law is that now you can take complaints or issues that you've had directly to the New York City Human Rights Commission, which I don't have to go through because we've just gone through this extensively, so I'm going to skip this. But one of the things I wanted to point out, this is on our website, the New York City Veterans website. We have a page dedicated to the GI Bill and the basic allowance for housing. It's one of the most common concerns that we hear, especially from students who are using their GI Bill, is that landlords don't want to take the basic allowance for housing as rent. So we have a copy of this letter. This is a one-page letter that we created with the Commission on Human Rights. It's over here on the table. You can download it on the website and bring it to a landlord. You could give it to a student veteran who's having a problem and say, give this to your landlord. This is proof, this is evidence that it is not permitted to discriminate against you because you're using the VAH. And if you have any problems with that, you contact our office and we will work with you directly. So this is a very fast overview of what DVS is. We have a lot of literature over here, as I mentioned, and we have some of our outreach officers here who will be able to answer questions. But the short version of the story is that we're here for New York City veterans and their family members on a one-on-one basis. We're not just trying to work at the policy level, we're also trying to work with people individually. So you can contact Eric Henry for specific questions about the law that we just discussed today. He's our general counsel and our director of intergovernmental affairs. I'm the press secretary and senior advisor on communications. You can always contact me. press@veterans.nyc.gov also gets to me. So anything to do with our community engagement or media relations, or just any question in general, I'll find someone to get help to you. And then here's our main line, and also just info@veterans.nyc.gov will get to us as well. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really pleased that you're all here, and thank you for having me here today. I hope to see you all again at future events.
So, again, another round of applause for Alexis and Dana. Thank you so much. So I'll leave you with a few things. So later this week, we've got other events coming up here at Civic Hall. Wednesday evening from 6 p.m. till 8:30 p.m., the New York City Veterans Alliance is hosting, along with Civic Hall, a discussion of the Ken Burns and Lynn Novick documentary series, The Vietnam War. We are hosting a panel discussion of Vietnam veterans and veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and moderated by Whitney Castle, who, as a Department of Defense civilian, worked with General McChrystal's team in Afghanistan. And so this is going to be a discussion of the hard questions. It's going to be a talk about veteran experience, but also the hard questions that America should be discussing about our current wars, looking at the Vietnam War through the lens that Ken Burns and Lynn Novick have provided. So again, that's Wednesday evening right here, starting at 6 p.m. It's free and open to the public, and we invite you to join us for that. Thursday afternoon, I've got you, Alexis. So Thursday afternoon, the New York City Department of Veterans Services, which we are proud exists now, and is now a member of Civic Hall, also very recently. And so DVS is hosting their first ever office hours at Civic Hall from 5 to 7 p.m. on Thursday. And so if you have, so if you have questions, concerns, needs from DVS, please come in this space from 5 to 7 p.m. on Thursday, and a lot of the good folks here from DVS will be here to listen to you, and New York City Veterans Alliance members will be here as well to talk in that, the advocacy government partnership that we have in this wonderful Civic Hall space. And then our next Lunch and Learn, because this was so good. Thank you all. Was this not a good Lunch and Learn? Did you feel learn and lunch? So our our next Lunch and Learn will be on November 2nd, yes, November 2nd, about the new New York State paid family leave policy that will go into effect on January 1st. And there are specific provisions in the paid family leave law for military caregivers. So it is for the caregivers of veterans and military members. And so we're going to discuss that same time, same channel on November 2nd. And hopefully we will have a lot more of these to come, in the upcoming months. So again, please stay around, discuss, please finish eating all the food, take all the information, and meet with all the great folks in the room. Thank you for coming.
So, how you doing, guys? Just so you know who's in the room. Hey, hi, my name is Corey, Director of Civic Engagement. Just want to thank everybody who came. Raul Rodriguez from American Legion 460, raise your hand. Sean Nixon from Sage Vets Program Coordinator, raise your hand. There you go. Troy Olson, Veterans Community Housing Coordinator for Help USA, raise your hand. From Brooklyn Legal Services, Peter A. Kemper and Jill Siegel, raise your hand. And Mark Ameruso from Community Board 1 Manhattan, their Vets Senior and Housing Task Force. Connect with these folk. We're all here for a common reason to help veterans and their families. And for the next Lunch and Learn, if there's another organization, invite them also. So the point where we have a sea of organizations all dedicated to one purpose, helping veterans and their families. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I didn't give you my card, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
And Alex Potts.
Hi, I'm Alex.